Should you join the military full-time or part-time? Today we're going to dig into whether or not you should be an active duty or reservist or guard. And I have 13 years experience as active duty, 2 years experience as reservist. 3 of the active duty years I spent as a recruiter helping people navigate this decision. So let's talk about it. First up, we're going to talk about active duty, which is what people generally assume to be like the normal military. And that is not to denigrate the reserves, but when you think military, you think active duty, and reserves is the smaller component. That's just the truth. It's the smaller component. So active duty, which is what most of us perceive, the first big pro here is full-time pay and benefits. Things like you get the VA loan right off the bat when you come out of MOS school. You get full pay and salary and benefits, and you are military full-time. You get the full experience. The second pro is career progression and education. You'll get promoted faster in the military. You'll have a lot of opportunities for travel and education, and you'll be able to go and get tuition assistance to earn your associates, bachelor's, master's. Yes, I even have enlisted friends who have their doctorate from being in the military active duty without even tapping into your GI Bill, which you can then use after service. Number 3, you get that steady lifestyle and structure, and I don't mean steady like it never changes, because the military is like steady like being shaken up in a snow globe, but I mean steady like, Monday through Friday, I'm going to put on this uniform, I'm going to do this thing. You're not trying to bounce and tiptoe between like civilian, I got to do Marine Corps on the weekend, civilian, I'm going to do weekend for 2 weeks for the Marine Corps. You're Marine Corps full time, which makes it a little bit easier to stay consistent in that lifestyle because it is just completely engulfing you. It's the kin to trying to learn a language with a college class as the reservist, vice trying to learn a language via moving somewhere and being completely indoctrinated in that language by living there. Number 4 is retirement and long-term benefits, because the day you retire from the military, immediately you are getting that pension and benefits, whereas with the reserves, there's normally a little bit of a lag delay there. And you can actually get there that 20 years and then go take another job. Number 5 is travel and adventure, because let's face it, full-time active duty does have a lot more travel opportunities than the reserves. Now, that's not to say you won't travel in the reserves, because you absolutely can. But the first 4 years that I was an active duty Marine, I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan. I had a combat deployment to Afghanistan. I also got to touch base on the Philippines, Guam, Korea, Thailand, Germany, Kyrgyzstan, Alaska. I know Alaska is not a country, it's just a place that I went to. Plus, I was in San Diego in like 3.5, 4 years. It was a pretty wild ride for a while. And then number 6, and this is probably one of the biggest ones in my opinion, is the camaraderie and culture. The active duty service is just a whole different beast, and if you've never really been in that world, you don't know what you're missing. But a lot of people who join the reserves go to boot camp, go to MCT, combat school, and then they come back home and they miss it. And so the active duty side, you get to build that real brotherhood camaraderie. You're in that unit, living with these guys and girls day in, day off, and it's just a really cool experience. Now, of course, we're going to talk cons for the active duty side. So the very first one being limited control over location. Whereas with the reserves, you're going to be serving right where you were serving. With the active duty side, that's just not the case. You may be moving all over the place. You're going to move when you're told, where you're told, and you may not have much control over that other than like, hey, do you want to go overseas, East Coast, West Coast? That's the choice I got in the Marine Corps. But even then, they don't necessarily care all the time. So, limited control. Number 2 is that work-life balance. You are going to work a lot. They often say if the military wanted you to have a wife and kids, they would have issued them to you. Meaning the military is your mission, your calling, your purpose, your work. It is going to take time. Depending on your job and your training and what you're doing and where you're at, it can be quite engulfing. Number 3 is the risk of injury or combat, right? So obviously, if you're training a lot more, the risk of training injuries is higher, but also active duty units generally get deployed for combat stuff sooner than reserve units. So there's a high likelihood you'd see more combat, and that just ups the chances of something happening in combat. Now, that could be a pro or a con, because a lot of us Marines join because we want to see combat. So, maybe that's a pro. I don't know. I would have thought so. But hey, there is the risk of injury. Number 4 is the restrictions and or bureaucracy. See, when you live the UCMJ 24/7, your lifestyle does have a little bit more rules than in the reserves. Some people love the structure. Some people don't necessarily love the rules. Number 5 is that impact on relationships. Now, from a marital standpoint, yeah, relationships, active duty are hard, but maybe more from the familial unit, where it's like, hey, you join the military and you're gone, and now, you don't see a lot of your friends, your family, a lot of those kind of pre-military relationships, I wouldn't say they deteriorate, but they become harder to maintain than if you went to the reserves and you came back home. But that could be a pro or con depending on your friend and family group. It might be really beneficial for you to get away from them for a while and grow and develop as a human. Let's dig reserves and National Guard right now. Pros, right off the bat, is that it's a part-time commitment, which works great for people who are, say, going to college, have a career they love. For example, I enlisted this gentleman who had played minor league baseball and had a career he loved with a kid and a soon-to-be wife, and for him, it just made more sense to stay local. That's great. The part-time commitment where you do 1 weekend every month or 2 weeks during the summer is wonderful for a lot of people. Coming right out of high school when you don't have a lot of those strings, going full-time might be great. But when you're really committed to stuff that's local and you still want to serve your country, the reserves and/or guard can be a great middle ground. Number 2 is that benefits access. You see, you're still going to get access to your GI Bill, your VA loan, and a lot of the other stuff, as well as, TRICARE Reserve Select and whatever. The benefits might come out a little bit different. For example, active duty, the VA loan, you get it 90 days after you join the military, whereas reserves, you get it either after 90 days of Title 10 orders, which is like active duty deployment stuff, or after you finish your 6-year engagement honorably. So you may not get the benefits in the same timeline, and they're going to perhaps rear their head a little bit differently, but you're still going to get a lot of those benefits, which as a supplement to what you're already doing locally could be very beneficial. Number 3 is community-oriented service. If you want to stay local and build a business and/or community or do service such as being like the mayor or the governor or be on the police force or whatever, then you can do that while staying local to your community and still serving in the reserves. Number 4, if you treat it as just a supplemental income to what you're already making, then it's great. In fact, you actually get paid fairly high for the days that you work comparatively to active duty, because they take away they take into account the time away from your family or home and travel, and so you actually get paid pretty well for those days. It's just that you work way fewer days, so the overall paycheck is still lower. Number 5 is that professional development. You're going to gain leadership opportunities, leadership benefits, and structure and understand. You get a lot of the intangible benefits out of the military, as well as the reputation, professionalism, the right to call yourself a service member and all of those things. But again, it's not going to have to take up your whole life, which can be very beneficial to some people. Now, the cons here, first one is that you could still be able to go on an activation or deployment. We saw just recently that the National Guard was activated in LA. They were activated in Ferguson. They get activated for national disasters. They do get activated a lot. Similarly, the reserves still have the opportunity to deploy. Now, a lot of times they'll take volunteers and they'll be like, who wants to go? And you get to go. But sometimes your unit will still deploy whether you want to or not, and you may have to go. So that could still be an pattern interrupt to your normal day-to-day life. And if that's not what you want, then that would be a con. Number 2, and I agree with this, is limited military immersion. I think part of the benefit for the military intangibly is being immersed in that culture and getting the discipline and the camaraderie and the esprit de corps, as we call it in the military, or in the Marine Corps, but all of the things that help turn you into that young man or woman very early in life and give you a leg up. You don't necessarily get immersed at the same level in the reserves or guard, and that's kind of a disadvantage and a con, I think. Number 3 is the benefit gaps. Unless you're actually mobilized, you're probably not getting housing allowances or full-time active duty pay. Your healthcare benefits will be a little bit off. You have to wait longer until you get the VA loan. There's just some stuff in there that is not going to be the same as active duty, and so if those benefits are very important to you joining, then the active duty side might actually outweigh the reserve side just because you actually get them all very quickly. Number 4 is dual obligations, meaning you're trying to balance a complete and entire life of family, friends, job, education, everything going on in the civilian world, while simultaneously trying to balance serving in the military. And so you might have kids' baseball games that you're missing because that's the weekend you have drill and all this stuff. And it can become a lot to try to balance together. And number 5 is the training requirements. You're still going to have to maintain the PT standards, the rifle qual and all the other annual requirements, as well as your training and all the other things that you have to do every year. Whether it's your smoking cessation training and alcohol is bad training and don't do terrible things and commit war crimes training. I'm joking, but you are going to have to do your annual training. And those kinds of things do take time out of your normal life. So it's still an additional obligation. Instead of it being your full life, it's an obligation on top of your life, which can be inconvenient at times. So I'm going to just read this kind of summary that I wrote out. If time commitment is a large factor to you, the active duty is full-time, the reserves is part-time. In fact, there's a very inappropriate joke in the Marine Corps that we call reservist tampons because they just used 1 weekend every month. If that offends you, maybe just don't join the military at all, because it is what it is. For benefits, again, active duty full, reserves, part-time unless active duty, or partial unless activated. For active duty, the career is your primary concern, whereas the reserves, it's your secondary or supplemental concern. For deployments, you might have frequent long-term deployments on active duty and occasional short-notice deployments in the reserve side. Civilian life is very limited on the active duty side compared to your military expenditure, whereas with the reserve side, you're going to have a lot larger exposure to civilian life than military. A little bit of a balance there. And both your retirements are based on 20 years, but your reserve time is points-based, and so there might be years where you miss some training, it doesn't count as a good year, and then it is what it is, whereas on the active duty side, like all your years count as good years as long as you don't get in trouble, and so 20 years is 20 years, whereas on the reserve side, it might end up being 21 or 22 years to equal 20 years for that pension. Here's where I think the reserves makes the most sense. I think the reserves makes the most sense if you don't want to leave home. Like if not leaving home is a huge factor for you, the reserves probably make sense. Or if you want to go directly to college out of high school and like that is your number one priority and the military is kind of a secondary, the reserves might make sense. Or if you want to go and commission as an officer, but again, you want to do it on a quick timeline while going to school. So you can enlist in the reserves and then come through and go through like an ROTC program or a reserve commissioning program with school. And having that active duty enlisted time in the reserves will actually help you and make you more competitive for the officer side. So let's say you're like hell-bent on becoming a Marine Corps military officer and you're not quite there to go to West Point, the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, any of the other military academies. And so you want to be more competitive. You can go and do the enlisted reservist side, come back, go to school, and that will actually make you more competitive in theory, right? Unless you're a terrible reservist and have a really bad record, to go and commission. Now, when do I believe that active duty makes sense? In almost every other situation. I think that for most young men and women, that joining the military right out of high school is like one of the absolute best decisions you could make from a tangible and intangible benefits reason. And I think that barring those three reasons I mentioned earlier that are like just hell-bent, these are like absolute musts, I think active duty makes sense. I should add one to the reserve side. If you're further along in life, you've already got a lot of stuff set up for you, you've got a family, like you are just well rooted where you are, but you still want to serve the military, then maybe the reserves make sense in that component. But I think for everything else, again, active duty still trumps. Oh man, use that word. Someone's going to take it as a presidential joke and get offended. I know. Trumps is a word that isn't the POTUS's name, but that still trumps the reserves in most cases. When you want like the real full life experience, or when you want to leave home, also both great reasons to join the military. The leaving home was one of my largest factors. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, a little town outside of Little Rock, and I wanted to leave. The military was able to pay me to do that, and I got to go have an adventure of a lifetime. It was great. So again, when you want to have those travel and adventure experiences, when you want to get to your benefits faster and fully, the active duty side also makes sense. On my notes here, I wrote down that active duty also makes sense if you don't want to play soldier or be called a tampon. So even when I'm riffing about it, it comes out because that's the joke. That's what we call them. Now, here we go. But full disclosure, right? Like I said, I did active duty. When I left active duty, I joined the reserves. And I actually think the reserves is a great middle ground. If you're thinking about leaving the military, but you're not 100% sure, transitioning into the reserves gives you some time to figure it out while still working towards that pension and not throwing it all away. So I did 13 active, I did 2 years reserves, and then I realized like, hey, I'm good, I'm done, I've got my own business, I live my life, and I'm doing my thing, I got my family to worry about and everything else, and I just completely left service. But I have a lot of friends who went active duty reserves and finished in the reserves or guard, and they loved it. Now, on a real note, this decision is 100% yours. And if you were to join the reserves, even though you wanted to go active duty because of a girlfriend or a family member trying to convince you to stay local, you'll probably regret it. So if you're going to go reserves instead of active duty, make sure it's because of what you want to do. And it is true, you can actually go from reserves to active duty, but it's incredibly rare and hard to pull off. In fact, I'd imagine if someone was to comment down below, the vast majority of people who tried to do that couldn't. And then there are the few that did get through that way, and they'll say that they were lucky. However, going from active duty to reserves is actually quite simple. On your way out of active duty, you're just like, hey, I'd like to go reserves, and then ta-da. And so that logically makes more sense to do the one that's like a surefire thing and then migrate to reserves if you prefer later, rather than hope that you can get in from the reserves into active duty, because there are unfortunately some dishonest recruiters who will just make that seem like an easy process, but it is very unlikely that you will become eligible to switch from reserves to active duty, barring a major conflict. Oh, and if accessing the VA loan and house hacking and building wealth like the way that I talk about on this channel a lot, which by the way, in case you didn't know, primary reason for Military to Millionaire existing is to help service members and vets achieve financial freedom. So if the VA loan, house hacking, getting started in that whole real estate journey is incredibly important to you, I would say, again, lean active duty because you get access to that benefit right away. Whereas on the reserve side, unless you go on like a Title 10 orders for 90 days, like a conflict, it's going to take you the full 6 years to get that benefit. Now, if this has answered your question about active duty or reserves and you still have questions about what branch of service to join, click on this video that I made and we'll help you decide what branch of service to choose based on your personality.